Hello everyone, Alec Alger the SideQuest Gamer here, and Star Wars The Last Jedi is now out in theaters. So in the spirit of that, I thought it's time to take a look at another Star Wars game. Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2, and like The Last Jedi, this game also takes place after Return of the Jedi at some point. Only difference is Star Wars Last Jedi is canon, while Jedi Knight not so much anymore. The original Star Wars Dark Forces was kind of a Doom clone from the mid-90s where you played as rebel mercenary Kyle Katarn, who was on a mission to find out about the Imperial Dark Trooper project that was under the direction of General Mach. The Imperials were manufacturing androids equipped with plasma rifles and an arsenal that could take out an entire rebel base, but thanks to Kyle's sabotage, with the help of pilot Jan Ors, they managed to blow up the General's ship with him and the Dark Trooper project with it. It was a really fun game, seeing characters from the movies make a cameo here and there, sometimes even as boss battles, but the game managed to stand on its own even in a market where FPS games were seen as Doom ripoffs. From original weapons to massive sprawling levels and environments, it still even holds up to this day, and with the success of the first Dark Forces game, a sequel was of course inevitable. But rather than have it take place sometime in between the original trilogy movies, this sequel is set after Dark Forces 1, more specifically sometime after Return of the Jedi, where antagonists Darth Vader and the Emperor are now dead, and the Empire is going through some power vacuum. The 90s were an interesting era for Star Wars, as thanks to Lucasfilms allowing for expanded universe content like the Dark Empire comic and the Thrawn trilogy novels to finally talk about the events after Return of the Jedi. There were so many new story possibilities to tell, and they are going to regret that in 20 years when they actually want to make the 7th film. But at the time, this meant that devs have even more artistic freedom than before. They can make new characters and show aspects of the Force that was not even seen in the movies, and they could depict events that wouldn't contradict what the movies established. There's not much on the development history of the game other than how this game used the new Sith engine and was under the direction of Justin Chin. The game notably not only uses 3D graphics, but also surround sound to help further the immersion, and this game is ahead of its time in the regard to be one of the first games to use 3D hardware acceleration with Microsoft Direct 3D, and for its time, it's quite impressive. But you can tell that the 3D graphics were really a product of its time. So as always, I have to ask the hard question. Does Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 still hold up after 20 years? Well, let's find out. Like all Star Wars games, it emulates the feel of the movies with a beginning text scroll, but rather than have the Star Wars movie feel be compromised by the MIDI sound font used by the original Dark Forces text scroll, players will be treated to an actual live orchestra playing the iconic Star Wars theme you'd come to expect. This shows a huge step forward for the franchise thanks to the new possibilities of CD-ROMs, and those who played the first game will notice that the Rebel Alliance has come a long way since we last saw Kyle Katarn receiving the Star of Alderaan. Within this time, they managed to blow up the second Death Star and are in the process of forming the New Republic. However, evil hasn't been entirely vanquished because this group of Dark Jedi are trying to rule it, and their leader Jarek is looking for the Valley of the Jedi for some reason, which is established as having some immense power that he could use to rule the galaxy. We have the Heroes group doing pretty well for themselves, but not without its challenges, and we have a new threat to the galaxy trying to find a magical power unlike any other. It really is a fantasy story set in space, and if you've never seen a Star Wars film before, it does lack some important context as to what the second Death Star really is, and what exactly happened to Darth Vader, the secondary antagonist from the last game, but this game shows more than it does tell for the most important story elements, which is great for the rare few who've never watched the movies and for some reason are playing this game. But the story presentation, it really is something else. We first see the camera pan down to a planet's orbit and a primitive CG spaceship exploding while a bigger spaceship known as the Star Destroyer pursues it. It's a nice little callback to the first scene in the original movie if I do say so myself. And then we see some man collapse as the Dark Jedi have captured some dude in a white robe. Here we are introduced to the antagonist being Jarek and the Dark Jedi, and these folks are just a riot with their campy acting. Especially Jarek. I mean, sure, he's two-dimensional as all heck, but if you're gonna be a villainous archetype, you better be memorable, and let me just say, it's so hard not to crack a smile when he's enthusiastically going about his evil plans.
I have no further use for you, old man.
So Jarek does something to Ron. I'm guessing it's mind reading, but whatever he's doing makes me uncomfortable. And he finds out some guy named Morgan Kintarn holds the value of the Jedi's location, and in true villain fashion, he gets what he wants and has no further use of Ron. But Ron gets up and ensues in a campy lightsaber battle against the Dark Jedi, and Jarek stunts him, kills him, and that's the end of that. But I have to say that laugh is unforgettable. And so are the try-hard actors in the scene. With all that being said, the first scene is an introduction to these really jarring FMV cutscenes. At face value, they look like they're part of some lost Star Wars movie, but there are several things like the hokey acting that makes Star Wars Episode 2 look like Citizen Kane, and the primitive CG objects that just don't look right, such as when Ron is fighting the two lizard brothers. At least I think they're lizards. Their frames of animation are not as smooth as the rest of the ensemble, making them look far more fake than the costume monster that Ron sliced in half. This scene also shows each of the characters as they are. Ron is the wise sage that's all good and incorruptible and will probably spiritually guide the main character later on. Jarek is the sadistic leader of the group who wants to rule the galaxy because he's a bad guy. That's what bad guys with spaceships do. He doesn't have the most depth, but he has a definite presence on screen, and I guess that's all I can ask for at the end of the day. But as for the others, I can't really tell you much about them. Bach just laughs at everything because he's the insane Dark Jedi. Saris is the girl Jedi, who is presumably the second in command, and Yun is just the reckless, overconfident Dark Jedi because he's the youngest member of their group, and of course young people are like that in works of fiction. And that's only more than half of them. I can't even tell you anything else the rest, other than they're just there until their boss fights call them into action. After seeing the establishing shots of the metropolitan Nar Shaddaa, it cuts to our main character, Kyle Katarn, watching a hologram of him and his dad having a conversation that's just recorded for some reason, but it serves more to give the audience some background info on Kyle himself, since the last game didn't really delve into his backstory other than he used to be a part of the Imperial Academy. We didn't know anything about his family like his widower father, and here Kyle is just meeting with Robot 8T88 for information on who killed his father. Turns out this droid is in cahoots with Jarek, and has his goons threaten to kill Kyle if he doesn't tell him what Morgan Katarn's data disk contains. Too bad Kyle refuses, and so he just walks off, and Kyle is somehow able to slam the other goon on the table before he hits the trigger. But whatever gets this game started, I could care less.
I'm not interested in leaving. I have some business to conclude with your friend, 88.
Despite some weird moments, it's not a bad intro sequence. It has the rising action, then cuts to a slower pace but more tense scene, and now the player has full control of Kyle in pursuit of 8T88 and the disc. While I really question the logic behind Kyle's slow ninja reflexes and the armed and dangerous goons, everything else works quite fine and succeeds in entertaining me. The fact that I never want to skip the intro cutscene shows it did something right, but it's definitely not going to get the Best Picture award if it got its own movie. And now we can finally play the first level. Whoa, it's definitely a late 90s 3D first-person shooter, alright. The visual presentation does reflect that quite a bit. The textures and level geometry look fine enough in giving me the idea that I'm in a scummy bar room, but the character models haven't aged that well, especially for the humanoid characters. They just look ugly. Regardless, these first two levels in Nar Shaddaa serve to give you the feel of the main character. It's not your older brother's Dark Forces game anymore because the movement is much smoother, where you actually feel like you're running in real life. Kyle has weight to him, and this just makes jumping around and blasting 88's thugs all the more exhilarating. Perhaps it's because the game runs at 60 frames per second without any lag, and as a result, it captures that cathartic nature that FPS games should strive for. The first level is a great introduction, giving you the Briar pistol, which has good accuracy, but isn't an automatic weapon, and its rate of fire is that of a pistol. And as a result, it'll immediately be superannuated by the automatic Stormtrooper rifle, which has an immensely satisfying higher rate of fire, needed for more dire situations like when I'm surrounded by brutes, for example. So despite the first level being a basic starter level with lower difficulty enemies, elevators, and bridges, the combat scenarios are nonetheless engaging to make it a breeze to play through. The second level is where things get more interesting. After Kyle shoots off the arm of the escaping AT-88, he goes after the dismantled arm since it's holding the data disk, only after being shot at by a TIE bomber and somehow surviving with just a mere flesh wound. Star Wars logic right there. Luckily, his friend Janor's takes it out and they decide to rendezvous after he gets the disc. Early in the second level, we get the disc, but we still have to descend sewer pipes and climb back to the top, and let me tell you, this game doesn't hold your hand anymore now that the enemies have deadly grenades, and there's actually some puzzles and platforming when it comes to the progression, such as the striped cargo fort, or even wandering around looking for a way out of the cargo area once a conveyor belt and lift is activated, now giving you a way out of that essential area. I know platforming in a first-person shooter can be a curse word in the FPS community due to there being a lack of depth perception, but given how you can quick save anywhere, it's not really punishing at all, and if anything, it just spices up an already solid shooting game. The grenades they can acquire early on are great for close encounters like with 88 thugs, but I don't really use them often in tight spaces, since the blast radius can damage you immensely. Only against larger enemies did I ever find use for them, or say if I was out of ammo for my rifle. The trick with grenades is that the longer you hold them before releasing, the further it will go, but unlike Blood where there was a meter to give you an idea of how far it will go, you have to time the charge in relation to how long it takes to hold it all in your head, and it'll take a few tries to finally get the hang of using them. Regardless, reaching the end of the level, Jan picks us up and they head for a New Republic frigate where Kyle is treated for his injuries, but during this he has a vision of the deceased Ron who tells him about the real threat of Jarek, and that he will have to learn the ways of the Jedi in order to protect the galaxy from the destructive power he seeks at the Valley of the Jedi. And this is where the game really gets started. Already it reintroduced the familiar combat elements we knew from Dark Forces 1, but it's interesting seeing Kyle, who previously stated how he's not interested in the Empire's politics, only for the world around him to all of a sudden get a whole lot bigger, becoming more aware of what's truly at stake. Vader in the ending of the first game mentioned how the Force was strong with Katarn, and it appears to be coming into fruition. I love how it's evolving the character of Kyle to new heights, and the game will truly live up to its Jedi Knight title. Jan and Kyle head back to his home planet and search for the old family droid, and the third and fourth levels will take place on planet Sulan. The third level forces the player to use the light they were provided to see the dark areas inside Kyle's abandoned house, or he can use the goggles, but either way it'll drain the limited energy that is provided to the player, so the player will have to not spend too much time with it activated before needing to pick up more energy. I don't really mind this, although it would be better if they implemented this obstacle after getting the lightsaber, since it provided some light in dark areas, albeit not nearly as effective as the flashlight. Especially since this is the second level to require a key card, and the first you'll have to really explore every nook and cranny for the necessary key needed for progression. This was a level design standard for the original Dark Forces, given how that was the norm for FPS games back in the 90s, but rest assured, none of the key cards are placed in such obtuse locations that you have to pull up a guide just to find them. But if it's not key cards, it sometimes involves finding and pressing switches that activate environmental obstacles like this water section. You want the walls to move so the entranceway to the next area is unblocked. I honestly like these kinds of puzzles since it can be really challenging but so satisfying once the solution is thought of. And while these challenges keep the game from stagnating, it is disappointing that the level's new weapon they're training the player for kind of sucks. The Wookiee bowcaster can fire one shot, while a charge shot would shoot out a dividing laser, but because the rate of fire is low, even for the single shot, and the auto aim isn't as precise as the other weapons, I just ended up using the rifle on these faux Tusken Raider-like enemies instead. The only good thing about the bowcaster is that if you do land a shot, it does some pretty good damage, but other than that, it's probably my second least favorite weapon in the game. But finally, Kyle reunites with his fake CG droid, using it to play the disc he acquired from AT-88, and receives one last holographic message from his late father. He gives Kyle a map to the Valley of the Jedi and Ron's old lightsaber.
Use it for good.
Problem was that Jarek's Dark Jedi took the stone ceiling that contained the map, so that's another problem for another time.
That was the last of them.
Now what do we do?
AD-88 will decipher them at Baron's head.
Fuck!
and level 4 is the first time we can actually use the lightsaber, and let me tell you, it feels so good to finally use it. Now, you don't necessarily feel like a Jedi in the sense you can do acrobatics like in the prequels, but one slice kills these enemies. And while this level is basically training you in the many uses of the lightsaber, from combat purposes to even slicing the grating of the aqueducts, eventually there will be situations that blasters are more of an appropriate for longer range combat situations like these deadly sea creatures you do not want to get in close range with. Not to mention, lightsabers are best for quicker, stealthy approaches to combat, because while Kyle can deflect some lasers, I'm not sure if it's RNG or not, so you can be blasted down by a large group of enemies, especially on the higher difficulties. Given this is primarily a water level, the game expects you to master the swimming controls at this point and accept the vulnerability of Kyle having a limited time before a lack of oxygen would cause him to drown. But like games such as Quake, it controls about as well as it does there, and as a result, it's pretty fun to control him underwater, although it's a lot more desirable to be on land for combat. Not to mention, I find it pretty awkward to jump out of the water and back onto land, but that's just a minor nitpick. The water does add a sense of risk versus reward for when it comes to exploring the secret areas of each level. Do you really want to risk spending too much time underwater trying to get that ammunition in that secret area? It's all up to you, which can be shown in the beginning of the Baron's Head level, which is the next level in the game, as Jan and Kyle continue to hunt for 88. This level is a city populated with marketplaces, but for some reason 88's thugs are terrorizing them. If you're going for a perfect light side campaign to unlock force protection, you're going to want to keep all civilians alive and be sure not to accidentally shoot them or catch them in an explosion of one of your grenades. It really took me a while to figure out how to progress in this level, but it does involve climbing on house balconies and other obtuse locations like jumping on awnings and eventually making it to the next level. And this one being Into the Dark Palace, it has somewhat of an annoying first half. There are landmines everywhere and it's pretty easy to miss one and get blown to smithereens. I won't deny it is pretty fun to use them against the Empire, but sometimes these landmines detonate just when it's deployed, and I just never found much use for them when I had my thermal detonators with me, which is why they're probably my least favorite weapon in the game. But the second half gets more interesting when ATSTs are patrolling the area, and you have to use force speed after activating the switches to go into the building before the platforms block the entryway. Then you have to deploy the platform again from the inside to get on the walkway and enter the palace through the corner entrances. This level section really wants you to make the most out of this new force ability, and I won't deny it's really fun running like the Flash while avoiding the blaster fire of the stormtroopers. Now this is pod racing. Oh come on, this is the Star Wars game where speed is a factor. How can I not make that reference? Yeah, you fanboys are the worst. And if that wasn't fun enough, you also get this really awesome pulse rifle called the Imperial Repeater that is easily my favorite weapon in the game because of how high of a rate of fire it has. Even though it consumes ammo really quickly, it makes me a lot less anxious when going up against these probe droids. After that level's finished, we find out 88 deciphered the map and delivered it to Jarek. Moments later, Kyle confronts 88, and then Dark Jedi Yun shows up, and they battle in a not-so-epic Jedi battle to the death. But Kyle spares him, because why not? And then stormtroopers show up, and this next level involves escaping the palace. You know things are serious when a freaking TIE bomber is being used to prevent Kyle's escape. There's a lot of great moments here, from the elevator puzzles to the hectic combat scenarios with the groups of stormtroopers. There's even a Kel Dragon deployed that's impervious to most laser type weapons. But since this level teaches the player the essential use of the new force jump ability, I just use that to my advantage and bomb the dragon until it's dead. The force jump isn't the best when it comes to platforming. It is essential, but it can be very easy to overshoot a jump and fall into the abyss below, or even die from a really hard landing. Something about predicting the landing trajectory just seems more difficult with a force jump than it should be, but other than that, I did use it often for this game, and it's quite a decent ability to have once the player gets used to it. The rail detonators are also introduced, but only at the very end, and I didn't really feel the need to use it in this level, but rather the later levels since they got much bigger and had more scenarios where enemies were at longer distances. Watching the enemy fly off screen is very amusing, I won't deny, and it's quite effective for threats like the ATST vehicles, but like grenades, I don't tend to use explosive weapons in tight combat situations where the blast radius will kill me in addition to the enemy I intended to kill. But really, it comes as no surprise that this is one of my favorite weapons to use in the game. With Kyle escaping, Jan and him head over to the fuel station where the cargo ship is about to depart to the Valley of the Jedi, and this level is very puzzle-based. The fuel puzzle is still kind of tricky to get the hang of, since you have to press buttons on various consoles to distribute the fuel from the canister you want to access to. It probably gives the player all they need to know to reach the solution. You can make the puzzle a lot harder for yourself with the ignorance of the player, but for a first-time player, it can really slow down the pace of the game. It didn't bother me, although there was this awful section where you have to go to the fuel diagram with 3 switches, press the first one, go in an elevator, press that switch up ahead, go down the elevator, rinse, repeat for the second and third switch, and that is pretty repetitive. Like, I don't feel like I accomplished anything after all of that backtracking, and I'm more so relieved as soon as I have access to the emptied fuel tunnels. Other than that, the stage can go on for a bit too long for my liking. I will say I do like the environmental hazards like the explosive red canisters that appeared before at the palace entrance, but these are great for taking out these stormtroopers and reptiles, but it can also not be good for those trying to prevent the Ugnaught casualties, since they're so freaking stupid, standing so close to these fuel canisters in a firefight. Great job, Ugnaughts, your species is doomed. There's also the fuel itself, which when shot at can be ignited and have a disastrous consequence, especially since these tunnels have enemies you want dead, and they also have laser fire at their disposal, but you best be sure not to miss them and have the lasers ricochet into the combustible fuel. We also get to test out a new force power and the last weapon given to the player. Force pull is the ability we get right off the bat, and it's pretty fun to use since it disarms weapon carrying enemies like stormtroopers. It also serves both in usefulness and pure entertainment value, since not only are enemies disarmed, they also run off like cowards, pretending they're not even the trooper you're looking for. But if you could care less about the novelty of it, you can also use it to pull in distant items like health, shield, and ammo pickups, and this can be very handy for tense combat situations when you're low on either. Suffice to say, of the 4 neutral force powers, this one has to be my favorite. And the concussion rifle that first appears in this level is quite good, being able to take out enemies from a distance, but its blast radius can also take out nearby enemies, and of course civilians, should you choose the darker path. But I'm kind of not a psychopath, so light side playthroughs kind of force you to be more careful when using this weapon. I only really use it often when I get to the more open canyon levels in the game, so with the exception of the lightsaber, most of the weapons function as well as they did in the original Dark Forces, if not better, thanks to the aiming and frame rate being improved. Each weapon has their own unique purpose, and none feel outright overpowered since there's ammo consumption as well as negative player consequence to balance out the more powerful weapons. I do like how some enemies are impervious to certain weapons, incentivizing the player to not always stick with just one weapon, although most of the time the Imperial Rifle and especially the repeaters, as well as the Dark Jedi boss battles requiring the lightsaber, were more often my preferred weapons to use, while the Briar Pistol and especially the awful Bowcaster I rarely use once I got the better weapons. But having all these weapons made me feel awesome when boarding the cargo ship, taking down all those stormtroopers. Levels 12 through 14 will take place here, and I won't deny I was stuck on this area until finding out those switch textures, which I thought were just there for the atmosphere's sake, were actual switches I needed to activate, which resulted in the lowering of these blast shields. It's pretty easy to get lost in it, especially with all those elevators in level 14 and color-coded doors you need to find a plethora of keycards for, but unlike the fuel station, these levels are very well paced and never overstay their welcome, especially for repeat playthroughs. Level 13, which is the boss battle against those 2 reptilian brothers, adds closure to the first half of the game, and the last neutral force power being Force Sight is unlocked to the player, and it's basically an alternative to the flashlight, which is good since the force powers it uses up regenerates over time, so I never have to find batteries when I just run out of the flashlight. In fact, that's probably the only problem. It just makes the flashlight and goggles obsolete once you have this better force power to use. I mean, why would you find batteries for your goggles or flashlight when you just have this better force power that over time will have the energy you need? This part of the game also has narrative closure as to where we spent the first 12 levels hunting down AT-88 from planet to planet, always escaping every time in an Imperial shuttle, but it's just so satisfying for the protagonist to find out AT-88's reward was a nice decapitation from the 2 Dark Jedi, and after escaping the cargo ship, Jan and Kyle head to Rusan where Jarek and the Empire have already arrived. And this is the point in the game where the difficulty begins to really increase, not artificially or anything like that, but just enough to give you a nice kick in the butt if you make one mistake. As soon as you land on Rusan, this level is filled with high and narrow ledges, heavily armed Imperials, dark areas, exploration-based mission objectives involving the sabotage of 4 generators. Basically, a little bit of everything is thrown into this level. This is the point where the game is done teaching the player and will only progress the difficulty curve with enemy placement and puzzle-based level design. Heck, this level alone had me go up against a squad of Imperials with repeaters and rocket launchers. Oh, and did I mention waters filled with red man-eating creatures and a patrolling ATST? That can be a bit intimidating for a new player, and while this does raise player anxiety, it actually makes the game feel complete in terms of fun factor. By then you should have all of your neutral force powers partially filled, and maybe even some morality based force powers. It gets really insane towards the end. We have to deal with the seemingly endless troopers, but it does make entering that elevator all the more worthwhile, and the following levels don't really disappoint either. Well, except for the boss battle levels, but they're really quick and don't take more than a minute to beat. Having fought Maw right after this level, who is missing his lower half of his body after being sliced in half by Ron. Ha! Darth Maul, eat your heart out. He reveals that he stuck the head of Kyle's father on a spike after Jarek gave him a slow and painful death. This is the deciding point for Kyle as a character because after angrily striking down Maw, Jarek reveals he captured Jan somehow. They don't explain how. She just got captured. He gives you the choice, and I use choice very loosely, to either strike Jan down and join the dark side, or don't and remain faithful to the light side. And depending on your actions in the game, if you didn't kill innocent people like a maniac and spent your 4 stars on light side abilities, Kyle will choose not to strike her down, and he's force pushed into the falling ship. But if you did kill people like a homicidal maniac and use force stars to purchase more dark side force powers, Cal for no reason strikes down Jan and declares his intentions of keeping the value of the Jedi's power to himself, to which Jarek responds by force pushing him into the falling ship. Sure, choices are fine and all in a video game, but it feels like only the light side result gets any sort of development up to this point. Of course he wouldn't strike down his good friend, but the dark side alternative, even if you're murdering innocent civilians, destroy Ouija, and buy the dark side powers, Jan doesn't think less of you for it, and for Kyle to strike down his friend that he had pleasant conversations with previously, I'm sorry, that's just freaking stupid. Again, while it's cool that a morality system is implemented in some form, it's very shallow by today's standards. Look, I'm not expecting Mass Effect 1 levels of player choice, nor even Deus Ex levels of choice, but I want some player consequence for killing everyone. Would it be so hard to film a minute of Jan looking anxious when conversing with an increasingly sociopathic Kyle? Heck, maybe after a mission where he killed millions of people, have her call him out. That would incentivize him to kill her, for she would be a burden to him. I would have even accepted if Kyle just let the Dark Jedi kill her. But as it is, that scene was just stupid. What were the writers thinking up to that point? But for what it's worth, I do think that the developers did a few things right when it comes to player choice. I love the Force screen, where if you go out of your way to look for secret areas, you are rewarded with 0 to a few 4 stars per level. Sometimes the stars are just given to you for when you unlock a necessary Force upgrade like Force Speed and Force Jump, but in the later levels you can either upgrade existing Force powers to make them more powerful, or add stars to new powers. And at this point, you are able to place Force stars onto the light or dark side Force powers. Now you can place them for specific Force powers on both sides, but if you want to unlock Deadly Sight or Force Protection, you will have to stay either completely true to the light or dark side of the Force, which also means missing out on the other side's Force powers should you choose to do so. And this system is also great because you're only as powerful as good as you are exploring and finding the secrets. In other words, if you really know your way around a level, you can become a really powerful Jedi, and it's definitely recommended to do that as you play the higher difficulties in the game. But if you're like me who missed a good amount, you can get through it just fine by budgeting your Force powers, to which I would never have the neutral powers go past level 2, and would either focus on upgrading Force Heal or Force Destruction. Speaking of which, these light/dark side powers make the game so much more fun. You actually feel like a Jedi or Sith when equipped with these abilities. Of course, it's more fun being a Sith Lord, just killing everything in sight with Force Lightning or Force Choke, but that's just a personal preference. It's not that I'm evil or anything like that. I just have kind of a distorted view of right and wrong. When it comes to the light side force powers, Force Heal is easily my favorite of the light side abilities, which heals a good amount of HP depending on the level it's upgraded to. Now, abilities like this make back to tanks obsolete, but the catch is you'll need to have your force energy replenished before using it again, which evens it out in terms of balance, and unless it's upgraded to level 4, it's never to the point where I feel the player can just outright exploit it. Force Persuasion is my second favorite because while it's technically an invisibility power, it's more like you're not invisible but the enemies are persuaded you're invisible for a limited time. It just makes taking out enemies all the more satisfying and really useful for players who just want to get out of a tough spot. Force Blinding, however, is also effective in messing up the enemy's strategy as they're temporarily blinded, but it just feels less effective and I only feel the need to use it occasionally, but it definitely pales in comparison to Force Persuasion, and the worst of these light side abilities has to be Force Absorb. It's supposed to absorb an enemy attack, but given how I want to avoid any sort of damage, I tend to actually dodge Blaster Fire or even a Sith Force power. And while the light side abilities have more of a defensive purpose, the dark side abilities, however, have more offensive capabilities if that's your cup of tea. Force Lightning is so much fun to use against enemies like Stormtroopers as it just rips away their health and they go down in seconds. Heck, it even helps against some Dark Jedi when they let their guard down. And Force Destruction is like a nuclear blast. The trick is not to aim the power at the enemies but next to them so they're caught in an explosion without blocking it. It really helps clear out a room full of Stormtroopers and even helps me take out some of the more annoying Dark Jedi like Bach, which is why it's my favorite of the dark side force powers. But that's not to say the rest are bad. Force Choke is great for taking out enemies in the next room, but I never found it useful for rooms full of Stormtroopers since I'll just end up being a sitting duck force choking one of them while the rest shoot me. And even then, there's better force powers to use against them, so what's the point? And Force Throw has objects in the room thrown at enemies, and while it really helps for combat situations like the fight against Maw, it can be so finicky at times where sometimes nearby objects won't attack the Stormtroopers. But as I stated before, staying true to either the light or dark side will unlock their respective 5th abilities. And to be honest, they really could have been implemented better. Don't get me wrong, it's very nice that the game rewards a player for their hard work reaching the halfway point, but Force Protection is so overpowered. It's basically a shield that can even block against lightsaber attacks, and I've gotten little to no damage, and it feels like I'm playing in temporary god mode. Seriously, I was able to take down Saris, Bach, and Jarek with ease thanks to this force power. And Deadly Sight is more balanced, but pales in comparison to Force Destruction since all it really does is take away surrounding enemies' health. While this is pretty awesome against Stormtroopers, it feels like it doesn't do much to the Dark Jedi in comparison to Force Lightning or Destruction. And as a result, while these force powers aren't perfect, they make the second half of the game more like what the subtitle says. This is Star Wars Jedi Knight. And while you don't ever feel like one from the prequels doing backflips and whatnot, you do feel like a Jedi in the original trilogy, specifically episodes 5 and 6. And although I'll admit a lot of these force powers I've never seen in the movies and probably originated in the many novels I've yet to read, like Force Destruction and Force Healing, it's pretty cool that they're there and they nonetheless make you feel like a magical Jedi. But that about covers all the force powers. How you level them up from here is all up to you. And the rest of the levels in the game complement these force powers very well. But they don't really serve as a replacement to your weaponry, but rather as an addition to them. Suffice to say, by this point you really feel like a one-man army. The falling ship level is very unique, although a bit short since you have a limited time to escape and get to your ship, and you have even less time on the higher difficulty levels, but I like how you have to think about the wacky gravity of the ship, needing to climb up elevator shafts and even make use of force jump and force speed to help you through various areas. And I really appreciate how non-linear this level can be at times with its multi-branching pathways, and it's especially admirable how you can activate switches on the falling ship's consoles to buy you some time. And with Kyle escaping, of course he's an idiot who crashes because lightsiders tend to do that, yet Darkside Kyle just lands at the bottom and fights Yun again for no explanation. Why he couldn't just fire the ship's cannons at him is beyond me, but Lightside Kyle is unconscious and Bach destroys his lightsaber. Then Saris tries to kill him while he's asleep, but for some odd reason that has no development beforehand, Yun stands in front of Saris and takes the attack and says something about how he has to kill him in battle.
Why?
He is a Jedi. He deserves a battle.
But I'm sorry, how does he go from an overconfident punk to some guy who's all about the honor of the Jedi? Does it have something to do with owing Kyle a debt of gratitude for not striking him down last time? It's never explained in this game. There's probably some expanded universe content out there that explains it, but I'm judging this game's story as a standalone story, and in doing so, we have to disregard other pieces of media just to see how it stands on its own 2 feet. But after fighting and defeating Ceres, the next 2 levels are knee-deep in Imperial territory with air current platforming involved as well as enemies you've come to expect. This is very elevator-centric, where you do a lot of platforming and climbing through the shafts, eventually making it to the more open enemy-infested canyon side. It's probably one of the largest levels in the game, and the second half does have a more combat-oriented approach, but man, the level following is even more switch-based, where you have to get this moving rectangular object down to the floors below, and eventually use that to platform, but it can get very confusing as to where to go next, since it's completely inside an Imperial complex, so much so that I had to look up a long play of where to go next. This is as complex as the level design can get, but I will say that overall, up to this point, the levels are better laid out than in the predecessor, because even though there were 3 or 4 times I did get lost in my first playthrough, there was never an Ord Mantell or Fest situation in terms of confusion. And the final actual level before 2 back-to-back boss battles happen is in the Valley of the Jedi, which starts off with you descending down towards the ruins, and there's a pretty smart puzzle involving pressing on a panel and opening the giant block, but you have to press in a certain number of times so that when you get to the weight rooms, they're open enough for you to walk onto and access the corridors behind them. And I especially like how there's 2 Kel Dragons in the darkest chamber with nothing but dead stormtroopers surrounding them. Jeez, this is a clever visual cue of just how dangerous this area is. Not to mention how there's one last ATST you have to fight before finishing the level to confront Bach and Jarek before they finally acquire the powers of the valley. Something about that specific enemy placement just adds to the story of how important it really is for the Imperials to harness this power. And the rest of the game, as I said before, are 2 boss battles. And there's a good reason I've saved these boss battles up to this point in the video, because let me tell you, the boss battles against the Dark Jedi freaking suck. While this was all meant to show, hey look, you get to fight bad Jedi Knights, to further advertise the lightsaber combat, I think its execution leaves a lot to be desired. Not that the first game's shooting boss battles were any better, but these Dark Jedi boss battles just are disappointing, while the build up to boss battles in the first game were just nothing more than one last enemy to fight to finish the level. Yun is the first, and he's really easy, amounting to just hitting him while he tries to use force powers like Force Blind on you. Just tap him with a lightsaber when he lets his guard down after he swings his lightsaber, and there, he will go down after a few taps. That's all. The second boss, being the Sith spawn brothers Pick and Gorg, were really annoying since not only are there 2 combatants to pay attention to, but Pick was hard to hit with my lightsaber due to his size, especially when he just hops around like an annoying little rat using his force persuasion powers on me. Sure, they're easy, but they're still nonetheless one of the Jedi fights I never look forward to when doing repeat playthroughs of this game. The third boss, being Maud, just floats around, and he's more of a threat, and I do recall him being able to force choke me, but I found him pretty easy, especially after his 360-degree saber swing. The rematch against Yun being exclusive to the Dark Side playthrough is even easier than before since I came equipped with Force Lightning, and he still only has the same tricks, except in a nice canyon area. I'm not sure why Dark Side playthrough Kyle wouldn't fight Ceres here, because that's what happened on the light side version of this canyon battle. Ceres actually progresses the difficulty curve of these boss battles thanks to the deadly sight, which would drain away my health, making this the second least awful fight in the game. But because I was true to the light side, even she went down easily thanks to me taking advantage of force protection. And boy, Bach is by far the worst boss in the game because he just hops around cackling like a maniac, and it's hard to land a hit on him. I found myself either using Force Blind or Force Protection just to have a chance, and he did go down easier thanks to this, but on the Dark Side playthrough, he's even more annoying since he would land his hits quickly, and I'd have to use back to tanks given there are no Dark Side healing powers, and he does occasionally land a hit with Force Destruction, which takes out a lot of health. Ironically, that's how I ended him on the Dark Side playthrough, but he's nonetheless the worst boss in the game, no matter what side of morality you choose. The final boss, Jarek, is by far the best best designed boss battle because he has Force Destruction and Force Lightning at his disposal, and while he wasn't as much of a threat on my true light side playthrough thanks to, yet again, Force Protection, the dark side playthrough will make this battle more of a war of attrition. I do like how after taking some damage he'll go into the central tower to heal himself, and you have to press the switches to end his healing period, but even then I could just take advantage of the opportunity to trap him in a corner and finish him off with my lightsaber. And that is a perfect example why these boss battles aren't good. I don't get a sense of stimuli tapping the lightsaber when their guard is down, because there's not really any sense of being a Jedi. Most of these bosses are mindless, and the ones that do have thought put into them are just ruined by a game exploit. And even if I never use the Force powers, it's still not that good. But thankfully, Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast has more of what I'm looking for in terms of lightsaber combat, and it goes to show how flawed lightsaber combat is against other lightsaber uses. But now that Jarek's defeated, you get one of two endings depending on your choices made in the game. In the good ending, Jan is rescued and the Valley of the Jedi is theirs. We're even treated to, I guess, the power being restored to the Valley after Jarek dies the warrior's death. I don't know. But the game ends with Kyle carving two statues of his father and Jedi Master Ron with his lightsaber, and the universe is saved once again. I do like how Kyle begins the game as a selfish gun for hire on a mission to avenge his father, only to take a more altruistic mission to save the entire galaxy from Jarek. It's a pretty decent character arc, and the chemistry between him and his friend Jan is improved from the last game, at least for the light side playthrough.
Like always, I owe you. Can you take care of her for me?
You're not going after Jarek, are you?
No. I'm going back to my father's home in Sulan. Can you meet me there when you're finished with the crow?
Of course. Is everything okay?
I don't know. I'll find out when I get there.
Jason Court and Angela Harry, who played Kyle and Jan respectively, despite their acting being occasionally off, like somewhere in between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope in terms of hokiness, I do think they bring the characters to life and are never boring to watch, even for the slower moments in the game. They're much better actors than the Dark Jedi ensemble.
That was the last of them.
But let me tell you, the dark side ending of the game is just stupid. Unsurprisingly, there's no build up to it other than Jarek entering the central globe. It doesn't even show Kyle killing Jarek or even entering the globe himself to claim the powers he killed his friend for. We just see an Imperial shuttle head to Coruscant, and then Kyle donning a black tunic and accompanied by Cirrus, talking to her about eliminating a rebel uprising on Dantooine. The scene gets even stupider as he watches a holofilm of his father talking to him, only to crush the device as if his father now means nothing to him. Again, the lack of any build up to this makes the scene very angsty for the sake of it, instead of the player being shocked by his turn to the dark side. If they really want to display the power of the Jedi, they could show Kyle using his new power to, I don't know, destroy planet Dantooine with the Force. That would be a really cool dark side ending, but as it is, the game feels like it was developed more for the light side playthrough than the dark side playthrough, as if the scenes for the dark side playthrough were just added in last minute. The dark side playthrough really feels like it's missing some FMV cutscenes to explain Kyle's justification to the dark side, and as a result, it really sucks, and I had no plans on ever doing a dark side playthrough ever again. Sure, I may use Force Stars to purchase some powers like Force Destruction, but I'm definitely not taking out civilian life just for the sake of reaching this ending. So that's Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. Overall, I think it's a good game. It's not the best FPS game of all time, but it is an improvement over its predecessor. While the 3D visuals are dated, the levels still convey a good sense of atmosphere when they need to, and make you feel like a part of this crazy sci-fi universe, and the CD quality John Williams soundtrack from the movies is used effectively throughout the game, where the fast-paced loud orchestra plays whenever there's action-packed stages, while the more quiet subdued pieces play in the levels where there's not a lot of action going on. And the tracks used for the FMVs are very well placed given the context of the situation, like when Jarek floats into the opening globe and the Emperor's theme from Return of the Jedi is playing. It's so ominous, but Jarek is about to gain the power to destroy everything in his path, so it's most definitely well placed in this situation. And really, even if Star Wars Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2 isn't a revolutionary game in the same vein as Quake, it still gave me the things I wanted most from a sequel to the original Dark Forces video game, and with that being said, please do check out this game on Steam, because if I do say so myself, The Force is strong with this game. And that's the last review of the season. Thank you all so much for a fantastic 2017. 2017 was when I took the show in a brand new direction. This was the first year where all of the episodes were edited on Sony Movie Studio 13 instead of the lackluster Windows Movie Maker. And not only that, I wanted my reviews to go more in depth with the game, not just so I could avoid angry comments from strangers wondering why I really think less or more of a game, but it's also to determine for myself how I really felt about a game. Once upon a time, Super Mario World was a great Mario game that was a bit overrated for me in comparison to 3, but when doing a playthrough for the review, I finally understood why many prefer it over 3, even if I'm not one of them. Regardless, I enjoy the game a lot more than I used to. In fact, now it's become one of my favorite games of all time. Also this year, I used to love Mega Man 6 as the best classic Mega Man game, but now it's in my top 5 favorite games of all time, even dethroning Mega Man X2 and knocking a few games down a peg. Thanks to the stellar level design, fun powers, and especially the great sense of closure to the NES games. I won't deny it's been a long but fascinating 12-month journey, and I thank you all so much for being a part of it. Here's to another 4 seasons. But until 2018, remember to stay awesome.